Okay, welcome everyone. My name's Emma Sloan. I'm the Policy and Partnerships Coordinator for the Elliott State Research Forest, and I'll be moderating this meeting. Thank you for taking the time to join our noon meeting. We'll be learning about the department's proposed draft Elliott State Research Forest Biennial Operations Plan. I'm going to briefly go over our agenda and how you can ask questions and provide comment, and then we'll get started with the presentation. So first, we're going to hear some opening comments and introductions from Darren Gooding, the Elliott State Research Forest Manager, followed by an overview of DSL's draft biennial operations plan presented by the Department of State Lands Forester, Ryan Singleton. The presentation highlights proposed actions on the research forest over the next 2 years. After the presentation, we'll have time for questions, and then we'll move into public comment portion of today's session. So as we move through the session, please hold your questions, but feel free to type them into the chat. So after the presentation's finished and during the Q&A portion of today's meeting, we'll respond to questions in the chat in the order that they were received. Following the Q&A and in the remaining time we have, we will open it up to you all, and I'll walk you through how to provide public comment here. So you can use the raise hand feature to provide public comment. It's in the reactions region of your bar at the bottom of Zoom. Time is limited and we may not be able to hear from everybody, although it looks like we have a pretty modest group today, so we should be able to hear from everybody. You can use the raised hand feature to get in line, or if you're on the phone, use *9, and you'll be called on in order in which your virtual hands are raised. So please keep your mic muted unless it's your turn to speak. And when it is your turn to speak, I will call on you and you can begin speaking. Please say your name, where you're from, any organization you're representing, and then please keep your remarks to 3 minutes and be respectful of others and agency representatives. And I'm going to help you track your time by flashing this 30-second sign so you can wrap up your comments within that time. If you don't feel like speaking up today, you can also submit written comments to this email here, and the public comment period closes March 31st, 2025. The email is elliottproject.dsl@oregon.gov. So before we begin, just a few other housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted throughout the duration of the session unless you've been called on to speak during the public comment portion. We are recording this meeting, so if you provide comment during the Q&A part of the meeting, you don't need to provide it again in the listening portion. We've got it covered. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, Forest Manager Darren Gooding.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let's take a couple of minutes here to introduce myself. I'm Darren Gooding, the new manager here for the Elliott State Research Forest, and I've been here now on the job for about a whole 2 months. Also, I'll take a moment here to introduce Amy Price, who's also on the call today, our new forest biologist, who also started about a week later than I am, so we're both really not quite long-termers here yet, but I'm really excited to be here and be part of the team that's now standing up management activities here on the research forest and beginning to implement the forest management plan that was approved by the State Land Board in October of 2024. The draft FY 25 to 27 biennial operations plan that we're going to talk about today is part of the implementation of that plan. And we welcome your thoughts, comments, and suggestions on it. So please feel free to let us know what you're thinking after we give our presentation. With that, I'm just going to keep my comments here short. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Ryan Singleton, our forester, to present some of the details on the draft operations plan. Thanks. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Darren. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Darren said, my name is Ryan Singleton. I'm the forester here at the Department of State Lands. And to go over the biennial operations plan that hopefully all of you have had a chance to look at and review. We'll go over, this will probably be about a 20-25 minute presentation. So let's get right into it. We're going to go over the plan elements and background, the harvest projects, and development criteria, as well as a projected harvest acres, volume, and revenue for this this operations plan. And then we're also going to go over some other projects and management actions. So Emma, next slide, please. So this operations plan, it outlines planned activities for the Elliott State Research Forest for fiscal years 25-26 and 26-27. And so what that means is it'll start July 1st of this year and then goes through June 30 of 2027. And so hopefully folks have had a chance to review the plan document. There's also several appendices that go with that. Appendix A is a project maps. Appendix B is a silviculture summary. And then Appendix C has the estimated timber sale acres, volume, and projected revenue. We'll go over that a little bit later in the presentation. And then Appendix D contains some of the potential research projects we're looking at as well. And then in addition, we have a project overview map that's available. So this is a project-wide map that includes all of the Elliott, and it is a geo-referenced map so that it contains the projects and where they're located. So if you have a navigation app such as Avenza or Onyx or something else, you can load that map into those apps and navigate around the forest. It makes it really easy to find where you're at in relative to where the project locations are. So part of this, in this plan, we have plan activities that include the timber sale projects with a mix of treatment types, including ecological or extensive forestry, intensive harvest, as well as restoration thinnings. So Emma, next slide, please. So it also includes sections on road management, young stand management, habitat restoration, monitoring and surveying, recreation, and other non-timber activities, including research. You will notice that some of those sections are pretty brief. Things like recreation and young stand management and others that we really haven't had a chance yet to flesh out. And those details, I think if you really in subsequent plans in the future, those sections will be much more, I think, robust. Right now, this being our first plan, we don't have a lot of substance to put in those, but you'll see those be developed over time in future plans that will have more detail. So right now, you can consider them as somewhat of placeholders, but there is some detail on some of those sections. So when you look at this operations plan, it is intended to implement and supplement the FMP, which is the forest management plan, and not replicate it. In other words, we did not want to necessarily take excerpts from that plan and put it into this operations plan because it'd make it too bulky. So that plan is available for reference. If you need to look things up, you can do that. And then also projects implemented through this operations plan will remain consistent with the FMP, as well as the in-process habitat conservation plan provisions and commitments. So right now, as it stands, we do not have an incidental take permit through the HCP, but we hope to get one here in the near future. We've had a little bit of a delay with the new administration back east. And so we're hoping that that gets worked out and that we'll have our completed habitat conservation plan and permit in hand so we can start actively managing the forest. As you look through this plan, you'll notice that we have harvest areas called projects. These are clusters of units, and we wanted to do that for economic efficiency and also comparison of different treatment types side by side. So rather than doing more of a shotgun approach, we wanted to see as best as possible combine harvest units into these sort of consolidated areas, and those are referred to as projects. Let's see, Emma, next slide. So as you're probably aware, Emma, I don't know if on your end, I can't see the very bottom. Let's see, bullet. Maybe everybody else can. I can only see the first four. I'll continue anyway, and see if maybe you can fix that. We have 4 treatment allocations, intensive, ecological, or extensive forestry. And the HCP is referred to as extensive forestry. In the FMP, we call that we call that ecological forestry. We also do restoration thinnings. And then for number 4 there is riparian thinning, which is in process. I'm going to see if I can adjust my screen a little bit to see. Yeah, I can't quite see that 4th bullet, but maybe I'll just wing it. So with the intensive allocations, those stands that we chose, they need to be at least 60 years old as of 2025. So part of that, we're pretty limited on where we can go because we don't have a lot of stands that are plantations that are older than 65. So most of the areas we chose are somewhere between 60 and 65 years old. And so that's where we landed as far as our intensive allocations. The ecological and extensive treatments, those are also focused on plantations. So we do have through the HCP the availability to go into 3,200 acres of mature stands. We're not choosing to do that at this point in time. So most of those, all of those current planned extensive treatments are in plantations. And then the 3rd one is restoration thinning. That is concentrated in the conservation research watershed, which is in the west and north sides of the forest, called the CRW. In those areas, what we're looking to do is target the older eligible plantations. And we want to go ahead and look to treat those older ones first before they are on a growth trajectory that is much more difficult to change as they get too old and they're too stand grown. And we want to be able to change those trajectories of those stands so they are not monoculture plantations in the future. So we're starting with those first and then working our way down. And even though I can't see the last one, I believe that is about riparian thinning, which we'll get into later. So Emma, next slide.
Ryan, I think you're alone in not being able to see the whole slide, but just let me know when you have reached the end of your road and I'll say the last couple of points.
Maybe I'll try to, let me do the adjust my view. Okay, I adjusted my view. Now I'm good to go. Okay. So here we have the project summary. So this is a table, which is Appendix C, which has the various treatments by acres, volume, and net revenue. So as you'll see here for this 2-year planning period, we have, see, I'm gonna silence my phone. I keep getting dinged. We have 625 acres of intensive. We have just shy of 16 million feet with $4.2 million in estimated revenue. With the extensive, we have about 1,000 acres, 11.6 million board feet projected, along with 2.8 million in net revenue. The restoration thins, just shy of 750 acres earmarked, 7.7 million board feet and 1.8 million in net revenue. So altogether, that is 2,300 acres, 35 million feet, and just shy of $9 million in estimated revenue. So note that net revenue, if you're a forester, this might mean something. If you're not, you probably, it won't, but net revenue is net of logging, hauling, and silviculture costs. So it's not traditional, what we call stumpage, which would be net of logging and hauling. We're also including silviculture costs there. So that is included in that net revenue calculation. The other, I think, probably biggest caveat with this plan is that not all of the projects listed in this operations plan are necessarily going to be implemented in the first 2 years. We do have capacity constraints, along with the fact that this is the first iteration of this new research forest. And so we want to make sure that we get off the ground correctly and not overshoot. And so the good news is that whatever we don't, in terms of the sales sold the first 2 years, whatever we don't get done or sold, those will just simply go into the next biennial operations plan after this one. And so it's not the end of the world, but we would like to get things up and going. Also note that even if we sell sales this year and next year, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be logged right away. Those are usually 2 to 3 year contracts. And so something we could sell a couple sales this year and they may not be logged till next year, the year after. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about these acres and volume and on the revenue, the timing of the revenue as well, that's may not come in right away. Note also that the acre caps that are stated in the HCP and FMP, those are we're within those caps. So that's 1,000 acres plus 300 acres of restoration thinning annually. And so you're looking at 2 years worth of projected harvest. And so we're well within those caps. So we're good to go there. Emma, next slide, please. All right, this one's a tough one to see in this presentation, but we thought we'd put it up there anyway. This is the project overview map. And so on that map, on the west side and the north side is kind of a tan color. That is the conservation research watershed. And then the purple units you see there, those are the restoration thins. So that's where they are located. On the right side and the lower part of the forest, that lighter orange, that is the management research watershed. That's where the extensive and intensive treatments are located. And you can also notice a darker orange. That is our flexible allocations. And so those are areas where we can do some different types of treatments, still within what these 4 allocations we've talked about, but we can do longer rotations. We can do some shorter rotations. We can do some different types of management in there, all within the context of the HCP and FMP, of course. And so then, like I said before, this map is a georeferenced map and can be used to navigate around the forest if you have a navigation app that works that you can load in there. And that's it for that. So let's go on to the next one. So this is an important project here. It's the Baldy Butte Communication Site Infrastructure Protection Project. So the Baldy Butte Communication Site is a very critical communication system for state police as well as ODOT. There is a pretty significant fuels buildup and large overhanging trees in and around that site. And it has been at risk and is today at risk of wildfire and wind throw. And ODOT has been hounding us for a number of years to get that area, that site protected. If it goes out for any number of reasons, it is a very crucial one for them to have. The good news is they are looking to, down the road, rebuild that site. It's pretty old, but in the meantime, we do need to protect that site. So what we're doing with this project, and we're hoping to do that within the next 2 years, is remove all trees within 1 tree height of the existing structure, as well as the tower guy lines, and then create a feathered fuel break outward up to 500 feet from the tower site. And so we are constrained to the east and to the south of this site because within a couple hundred feet, we run into ODF ownership. So that will be a little tighter for us to do the project, but we can go out 500 feet to the north and to the west. Note that this is a covered activity in the HCP. So we have infrastructure protection for our two communication sites there, which is also Dean Mountain. So we are good to go. Once we get that habitat conservation plan ITP in hand, we should be fine to proceed. Let's go to the next one. Emma, thank you. So we are working with Dr. Gordy Reeves and associated research team on riparian thinning projects. You'll note that at least in this first 2-year period, it's going to be baseline monitoring and identification of candidate stands. There won't be any actual thinning treatment during the first couple of years here, but they need to collect a couple of years worth of data and then make sure they're identifying the correct stands, which are really just the riparian areas to work in. And so that's part of what's going on. There is detail to this project in Appendix D. I think there's a lot of interest in this type of work to see where it goes and how it could necessarily or not affect a policy in the future. So I think a lot of folks are going to be really interested in this research. Again, not going to do any actual thinning first couple of years, but get all of the data, necessary data collected to be able to proceed down the road. In terms of road management, we don't anticipate that there's going to be any new road construction during this BOP period. So most of the roads are in place. We're looking at plantations for the most part, which already have roads in and around them. So we're pretty good there. We're not going to be doing much in terms, we don't see any new road construction, not anticipated at this point during this period. But what we will be doing is our routine road maintenance. That is for safe public travel as well as access for fire protection resources. Our current contractor, Titan Kelly, does a great job of keeping this the forest road system intact and up to standards. And so they've done a great job, and we will continue to do that here in the future. Next slide, please. Monitoring. Obviously, monitoring is a very important part of what we do in terms of compliance with the HCP. So any pre and post-harvest monitoring and reporting will occur according to the standards that are set forth in Chapter 6 of the HCP. Not sure how much post-harvest monitoring we will be doing this first couple of years because we just don't know how much harvest will actually happen, but whatever is necessary, we will do, and also on the front end as well. So that is covered in this operations plan, but just know that obviously we're going to be doing all the monitoring that's necessary to stay in compliance. As part of that, there is a monitoring guidance tool that is being developed by ICF, which is our contractor to help develop and write the habitat conservation plan. And so ICF is working with our DSL staff to come up with this guidance tool, which I think is a very important and very useful tool for us to be able to track all the monitoring that goes on and then provide all the reporting that is necessary according to our standards in the HCP. Okay, so barred owl management. So we are committed to advanced barred owl management program within 16 months of the HCP permit issuance. And so that is something where we're developing a program where there will be barred owl removal in the future. So this planning will occur during this 2-year operations plan period, and it'll include engagement with the Forest Service, with the BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, ODF, and Weyerhaeuser as well, which is a neighbor of ours. So yeah, that is sort of one to kind of wait and see. We kind of have the we're sort of greasing the skids and getting that all ready to go, and hopefully we'll have that done and ready to implement full-fledged within 16 months after we get our incidental take permit. And then next slide, Emma. Okay, so yeah, aquatic habitat restoration. So Coos Watershed Association, they've been a great partner over the years. They've got a really deep history on the Elliott and have implemented a lot of really important aquatic projects in the Elliott, as well as collected tons of data over the years. So they have a really deep knowledge. They also have some projects that have been planned and sort of sitting on the shelf waiting for us to move forward with this new research forest endeavor. And so I think they are ready to go. We just have to kind of make sure we got the funds are secured and everything's in shape. We hope to implement some of these projects during this first couple year period. And then we'll be assisting through authorizations and then also providing materials such as trees and root wads from our harvest operations. So that'll be a kind of our in-kind provision to help get those projects going as best we can. And then there'll also be potential future projects in terms of aquatic restoration that will be explored during this time with, maybe additionally with Coos as well as other partners as we kind of flush that stuff out. Let's see, and then the carbon project. So yeah, we're working with our carbon project contractor right now. We will be looking to get inventory plots put in hopefully this year and next year as part of the project development. And so that's what will occur during these first 2 years, as well as there will be third-party verification of those plots once they're put in. And then once the project is fully verified and ready to go, then after that time, there will be carbon credit sales. And so that's, that could be 3-4 years down the road. We just don't know quite the timing there, but we are in the midst during this biennium to go ahead and get that project up and running in terms of development and hopefully to the finish line here in the next couple of years. And then I think, Emma, one more slide. So research. So yeah, we talked about the riparian thinning sites in a previous slide. So that again is ongoing, all part of Appendix D. There's other additional research projects that are described in Appendix D. I think these are mostly OSU-led projects. All of this said, there's ongoing conversations with the board and then other research partners and entities to design an overall research approach and then make sure that the budgeting is in place and all that. That's something that's just it's continuing conversations and it'll always be iterative here, especially the first few years as we try to get our feet in the ground and get that laid out. But note that there is a planned project, especially with this riparian thinning, that are in the works, and there's other ones I think that will soon follow. And then this you can say is maybe a little outside of what you'd call traditional research, but one of the important things as we get this forest up and actively running is to test the assumptions of harvest revenue and logging costs, and then overall operational costs. I think the one thing that we're really interested in seeing, because I guess I should back up, we do have it's been earmarked that we need to have this be a financially viable forest. So we need to make sure that we cover our costs. And one of the things, we went through a lot of assumptions coming into this as far as logging costs and growth rates and standing inventory. And one thing that we will be able to learn after there's first few years is what are the operational costs. And that's really going to be a lot what we're really curious about is in the ecological extensive treatments as well as the restoration thinnings. Those can be operationally complex and potentially very costly. So it will be very interesting to us to see when we sell these sales, how the purchasers are choosing to build in costs associated with those areas being harvested, those types of allocations and treatments being harvested, because it is a bit of an unknown. And so those are are something we really got to learn. Also, we need to test the assumptions of how good is our inventory right now, and that will be in our projected harvest cutouts. And what we will learn from that is when we get scale receipts from these logging operations, we will be able to see exactly how much volume has come out and then how that matches up with some of our projections, and we can make adjustments accordingly going forward based on what we're seeing these first few years. So again, not what you'd call I guess, typical research, but observational data, anything that we can find out from these projects in terms of costs and revenues and everything else is going to be very important for us. So with that, Emma, I think I am finally done. I think we can go into the
Yep, you're
next.
done. Thank you, Ryan. And thanks, Darren, for your intro at the beginning. Move into questions. So if you haven't yet put it in the chat, go ahead and drop your question in there. We only have about 3 questions, so we have plenty of time. We're going to start with our first question today, which I'm going to hand over to Brett Brownscombe, our transition director. And the question is asking, what is the status of the carbon credit sale and who's conducting it?
Okay, and thanks, Fergus, for the question, and thank you for just tracking this as you have over all the years. So yeah, so as Ryan mentioned in the presentation, we have the carbon project in the draft biennial operations plan, and the reason for that is transparency and to keep daylighting it. The work on that right now, which is being conducted by the project developer, is still in the very early stages. The agreement we signed back last November steps out the process. And so the first step is a new contracting with someone, ideally locally, to collect inventory data on growth and carbon in the trees. And these are specific data points and plots on the forest itself. So it's on the ground intensive work. So that would happen first, and then related to that, and along the way, they're going to be modeling or remodeling the assumptions around what is the baseline, like, what would happen in the absence of a carbon project on the Elliott, and then what is our project scenario? What are we going to be doing based on our FMP decision and focus on carbon sequestration that would result in credits? And so the credit calculation part of this is still to come. And I think you're familiar with the feasibility analysis that was done in 2023. And I mean, at this point, we really, that was a good feasibility analysis, but the numbers we imagine will change because we didn't have an FMP then. The FMP has gone a direction further around carbon sequestration. And there were a lot of assumptions around things that were not firm back then. So now that things have firmed up, essentially the real numbers and the real analysis around credit availability and amount will happen. And the long and short of it is, after that, there's still a few steps in the process, including independent verification of the product or the project and credits, and then the process of marketing and sale. And so, I mean, we're estimating it's going to be still 2 years out before any carbon credits are sold.
And Brett, Fergus just put in the chat if DSL is committed to a new sale. Do you want to cover that while we're on this topic?
Yeah. And can I ask, Fergus, is the question, are we committed to whatever a new comes up with? Like, we're definitely going to sell the credits? I'm not sure if Fergus can come on the mic to answer
Fergus,
that.
if you want to unmute just to clarify your question, that would be great. I can unmute you.
Yeah, thanks, Brett, and thanks for your help with my computer. It's giving me nightmares. Yeah, I was just wondering, is this a commitment to work with what's the status of the agreement with this consultant?
Yeah, yeah. So we've made a commitment and we've signed a carbon development management agreement, a CDMA. So our commitment to them is to work through the steps in them developing out a project. And then there are certainly ways to terminate that agreement. And it wouldn't be, at this point, we're committed to working together enough that it wouldn't be without any liability to the state. But there are still off ramps. And I think what we've heard pretty clearly from the land board and the direction that we've adopted in the forest management plan is go forward with this and develop this out and move forward with credit sales and developing out a different business model on this forest that can be tied into research on carbon and carbon markets and shape the kind of art of the future of the markets and do it in a time limited way and learn along the way and sequester carbon intentionally and build in a different revenue stream. But if things are over the next couple of years, if there's major I don't know, flies in the ointment, there are off ramps, but it's not, we're under contract at this point. Did that cover it?
Yeah, thanks that's a deep pool to dive into. Thanks for taking that on. As I recall, the letter that Vicky released from ANU mentioned that they could have pursued the possibility of more extensive carbon offsets if the state chose to empower them to do that. But it seems like you guys did not ask them to go any farther. Is that correct?
If I'm remembering it right, that I mean, yeah, the context is we're not looking to and we haven't directed ANU to move forward with like the most robust, expansive carbon project that could possibly be done on the Elliott. We wanted to keep it really conservative, recognizing that there are certain commitments that we're making to species that would be for species and habitat and avoid double dipping between carbon and Endangered Species Act. So we wanted to be careful around that for additionality reasons. And we've also wanted to keep it conservative in the sense that we want the flexibility to be able to do the active management on the timber side and be able to move around the forest. So to not have all the growth that we could potentially have tied up in carbon and therefore overly constrain us on the timber side. So that, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at, but are you feeling like, well, I don't know, we don't have to do it now, but I guess we're curious to know kind of what the public is thinking or what you're thinking around what we should know on the carbon project side. And it's in the operations plan for that reason, to like give folks a chance to tell us. And we know it's controversial and something different.
I'm gonna put us in a different direction, and then maybe we can circle back to this during the public comment portion because we have some ops plan specific questions. So I'm gonna punt this to Ryan. Francis asks, page 3 of the introduction says activities within the MAMU occupied stands will be restricted during breeding season. What activities are proposed inside MAMU? Ryan, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, there is no activities planned inside those. The only thing that you could say is if there's, I mean, we have a road system and there's road systems that already exist that go through areas, then you could say that's not really a planned activity. It just happens to be there, that infrastructure. But no, we don't have any planned activities inside of occupied mammal habitat.
Okay. Our next question comes from Caitlin. You mentioned baseline monitoring for the restoration thinning. What pre and post monitoring happening at the intensive logging sites?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics on that. We have Brett, you might be able to jump in here with, I'm thinking of the HCP without that right in front of me, but I don't know that we have a lot of pre-monitoring. It's mostly the monitoring we're talking about is going to be reporting of acres. And that's part of our, how many acres have been harvested of this treatment type, and here's where they are spatially. And then there's going to be, I think, aquatic monitoring in place. Not my area of expertise there, so I'm not sure specifically what's that on the aquatic side. But and I think the question was to what's as far as the restoration thinning monitoring. There'll be requirements in the HCP, but we'll also do probably after those treatments, there's going to be some stand exams done so we can see how they turn out in terms of the structure that's there. And so we'll learn by that, and we'll also be able to report that. So yeah, I don't know like, hey, yeah, we're going to do exactly A, B, and C off the top of my head, but we will make sure that we are following anything that we are required to do in the HCP and FMP.
Okay. I'm going to jump back up to one of Fergus's earlier questions about the status of the triad strategy. Brett, did you want to field that?
That's always a fun one. Sure. And Ryan, Darren, Chris, if you have anything to add, please jump in. So yeah, I mean, essentially what we have in our forest management plan is we have the unifying research question, and we have I think 5 themes that research will follow. And so we've got that structure in there. And then we have also the kind of recognition in the forest management plan that we're still working out what the research partnership will look like. And we're doing that in coordination with Oregon State as well as other entities and the board of directors, and working that out. And then we also, as you know, Fergus, we've got the triad question in the FMP saying like, we have this broad unifying question. We have the specific themes that research needs to follow as our structure. The triad design isn't the only way to test and research under those themes, but it's the way that we've been working very clearly for years on the Elliott. And so the the FMP positions this as, is it going to be the same thing? Is it going to be a modified version of the triad, or is it going to be something very different? And so that's something that we're working on and talking through with OSU and the board. So it'll kind of play out as part of the public conversation with the board of directors and around this. And meanwhile, the approach of the sub watersheds and the allocation to different types of management, whether it's ecological or intensive or restoration thinning or passive. That's all, I mean, we feel like that's all solidified and gives us a chance to pursue these broad, the research structure, the unifying question, and the themes. And whether we can do, I think we can't do 40 replicates of triad research like was originally proposed in 2021, but there's still opportunity to do something less than that, and we're kind of working that through with the board and OSU on the value proposition of it. So it is something where it's not really a operations plan question. It's a broader question that where it feels like it would help to hear from the public on where you are on that, and kind of where you want the triad effort to go. So I'll save that for public comment, I guess. But yeah, that's the short of it. It's a work in progress. I guess overall, we don't feel like we have to answer that right now before we do any management on the Elliott. There, like Ryan said, there's 4 projects that have been proposed and potentially could occur during the or get started during the operations period. And those 4 projects are in Appendix D. There's a variety of other questions that we're needing to answer around operating this forest as a research forest to shore up information we have. So we feel like it's a little bit of walking and chewing at the same time, or walking before we've resolved some important things. But we feel like we can do both and still call this a legitimate effort around research.
I know some of these questions probably have follow-up questions. So if folks can just hold those in their mind, and then maybe we can have more of a back and forth dialogue during the listening session. I'm going to keep moving through the questions we have in the chat. So hold your follow-ups in your brain, and we can discuss more in depth. So Francis asks, what is the age of all the projects? Is that information in the material we have?
So the specific stand ages are not in the materials. It's pretty safe to assume that we're working in stands that are between 55 and 65 years old. And they're all plantations. We don't really have any plantations on this forest that are older than about 65 years old at this point in time. So all of the the intenses are between 60 and 65 years old. At that age, 2 to 3 years plus or minus is not a big deal. It's all kind of about the same. We're looking at the extensives. We might be in some little bit younger stands than that, maybe down to age 50, 52, 53. And then the same with the restoration thinnings. Those are, I don't think we are in anything less than probably 50 years old. But you know, those structures are all about the same. The stands look very similar when you get to that age. So yeah, I don't think that going down to like, hey, is this stand 62 versus age 64 is really all that relevant in this context.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to go back to one of Fergus's earlier questions. They ask, net value seems to vary little between the treatment protocols, from 237 million board feet for restoration thins to only 270 for regen harvest.
Go back to that slide, Emma, if you could, the table. So the question was again, I'm sorry, I think I didn't quite follow that.
Net value seems to vary little between the 3 treatment protocols. So the price for restoration thins versus the price for regen harvest.
Okay, so you're talking about in terms of stumpage there. I think, yeah, if you did the math on the intensive, certainly you have 625 acres for almost 16 million board feet versus restorations then, which is 741 acres for 7.7 million board feet. Yeah, that's a big difference in terms of volume per acre. And then also associated revenue is a pretty big difference between 4.2 and 1.8. And then I think they kind of fall in line with what I would think. Extensive is going to fall somewhere in between those two. So yeah, I don't think I follow the question.
Fergus, maybe you can pose that question again during our listening session. Just keep that in mind. Francis asks about extensive treatments. In extensive treatments, 20 to 80% retention required. Will the public know what percent retention is used on the extensive projects?
Yeah, so when we get to the extensive ones, you'll see the detail in the operations plan as far as is this one 20 or this one 30 or is this one 60 or 80 or whatever is not in there, because that'll have to be fleshed out a little bit later. But yeah, you'll know pretty much once those projects are laid out what level of retention there's going to be in different areas. What we wanted to do is a variety of retention levels to test. And so we're not necessarily going to do everything at 50%. We obviously are not going to do everything at 20% or 80%, but we want to do a variety to begin with. And where those will occur, like on which stands, we don't know yet. We're in the process of developing that, and that will be probably fleshed out here later this spring and summer as those projects are laid out on the ground. And so as that information, and once we kind of get that dialed in, becomes available, we'll certainly let you know.
Okay. Our next question is about chemical treatments. So page 4 of the operations plan states that intensive treatments are eligible for chemical manual site prep to ensure successful regeneration. What specific chemicals will be used?
That's really depends on what vegetation is there. So yeah, I won't get into the specific chemicals being used because I don't know exactly, where those, because it's going to be on a case by case basis. So we're talking about site prep, chemical use versus manual. Manual is very tough to do in those areas. But yeah, that will again, if that information is important to somebody, when it comes time to do those site prep sprays or release sprays, that information can be available. It's going to be pretty much whatever standard operational use for, depending again on the vegetation that is going to be treated in those.
Yeah, Ryan, if I remember it right, and this may be one we could dig into and follow up on. I think the HCP has some standards in there related to, like EPA approved, even though the HCP doesn't include or cover
You're right.
spraying as a chemical activity. We could dig and find that. I don't know,
Yeah,
Francis,
yeah.
if that helps with the concern, but
Right.
it's
It's
not just,
obviously going to be anything that's EPA approved. You'll be following labels. Obviously, when you're spraying, you got to follow all of the proper procedures. Yeah, when doing those types of treatments. So yeah, nothing will be out of balance. Put it that way.
Okay, we have one question left, and then I'm going to move us into our public comment portion of today. So, also from Francis, the FMP page 6 through 13 requires the retention of older trees left from prior logging. How often is this happening in this operations plan?
So yeah, in regards to the intensive treatments, yeah, any of those older trees that are in there, so they would have been leftovers from any retention that was done in the prior harvest. It's going to be very unlikely that we're going to find. A lot of times those end up just blowing down. If they are in there, those will be ones that we will certainly want to keep around and retain as part of, retention standards within the intensive. So there likely will be, in some of those units, though, boy, I don't see them very much, but if there are in there, there's older legacy trees, certainly those will be retained. Where they, exceptions would be is if there's some sort of a potential hazard in terms of safety or something else. But to the best extent possible, those older legacy trees, if they are in those plantations that we will be harvesting, those will be retained.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So just a reminder before we move into the public comment portion, if you'd like to provide your comment in written form, you can submit them to this email below by Monday, March 31st. And as we move into the public comment portion, just remember to raise your hand or press *9. And by raise your hand, I mean the raise hand function in Zoom, not your physical hand. And then please note that we are recording this, so your public comment will be recorded. And just a few more guidelines here. I'm going to call on you in the order that you've put your hand up. So far, we just have Fergus. Keep your mic muted unless I've called on you. You have 3 minutes to speak. I think we have enough time for you to speak a couple times, but 3 minutes each. And then if you'd like a staff response, we'll give time for staff to respond. And I'll hold up the 30-second card when you're nearing the end of your 30 minutes. Please include your name and any organization that you're representing and where you're calling from. So let's start with Fergus, and I will unmute you. Oh, you've unmuted yourself. Go ahead, Fergus.
Thanks, Emma. Welcome, Darren. Thanks for taking on this momentous and very pregnant position. You put yourself in the line of fire. In response to Ryan's question about finance, I'm not going to go into it with my time, but if you just divide volume by price of the 3 treatments, you'll see there's very little difference. That just seems very unreasonable, that riparian thinning volume nets out the same amount as intensive. I'd like to touch on a couple of operational and policy questions in my 3 minutes, and possibly I'll be able to move on to other topics later. The first one is the triad question. One of my challenges in trying to prepare these remarks is finding a metaphor for what's going on with the Elliott. Since Senate Bill 1546 ran into a brick wall and disintegrated, I think train wreck is the proper analogy for what happened then. But what's happened since seems to be the engine derailed and went into the river, and Brett has been brought in to resume leadership in this project. But I'm afraid that the baggage that train was carrying, the triad, is damaged goods. Just a quote from Dr. Franklin, I believe the triad theme is indefensible as a basis for the research program. It's kind of complicated, but what the triad really appears to have been is a strategy for colonizers to decide how they're going to divide up newly conquered territories, whether it's better to distribute farming or forestry across the whole landscape to obtain your resource goals, or to concentrate it all in one area and just destroy that and leave the rest. As Dr. Franklin points out, that's really only applicable in a completely unregulated framework, and which is not at all like what we have here, which is closely regulated land use in every category. And then the juxtaposition or the conflation of Dr. Franklin's career work in developing ecological forestry with the concept of extensive land management, they're two completely unrelated factors. One is a colonizer strategy, the other is an ecosystem management strategy. I know as a practicing forester, I waited decades for Dr. Franklin's work and his book, Ecological Forest Management, to be issued in 2018. And I really have to say, I'm dismayed at the disrespect with which his work has been treated. And if you look at the triad strategy, you've divided the entire landscape up into these chunks, these arbitrary chunks. And on a small scale, if you look at a watershed, okay, you've got one watershed that's 20% intensive, 40% extensive, and 40% reserve. You've got another watershed, which is 40% extensive, 20% intensive, and 40% reserve. Well, when you try to compare the outcomes from these two different approaches that are replicated across the entire landscape, what you've created is a three-body problem. You've got three variables, and that's an unsolvable problem. So really, I'm afraid to say, what OSU did was create a framework for the Elliott that made it impossible to do research with meaningful outcomes because you got a three-body problem that's insoluble. I don't know what to say more about that. And then touching, how's 30 seconds? Oh man, that goes by fast. With the carbon, as I've been telling you guys from the beginning, you got to start with the carbon. You don't wait till the end and stick it on. I mean, I'm glad you got started on it, but it's got to underpin your entire strategy. You start with the carbon. The main management problem you're trying to deal with is what is the interface between MAMU and carbon. And that should be the overriding and dominant strategic approach. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Fergus. If you keep your hand up, we can come back to you. But let's move on to Francis. Do you want to unmute?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, it's interesting looking at proposed logging in the Elliott after how many years has it been? Has it been like 5 or 6 or more? And I was glad to see, I went and looked at the units. I was glad to see that there wasn't any mature forest here on the regeneration harvest schedule. I did notice that most of the treatments appear to be in coastal martin habitat. And since this is not included in the habitat conservation plan, I assume that you've done surveys on these units for the coastal martin. And I was also wondering, I noticed some units would put a hard edge next to a mature forest. And I assume those mature forests have been surveyed for marble murrelets. Am I right on these surveys? It wasn't described in the public documents what surveys were done. And I sort of thought that should have been in there. So maybe that's more of a question than a comment. About the surveys. It's interesting about the grazing. I didn't know about the grazing lease. I think that should be added. The area of the grazing lease should be added to Appendix A. The map should be added to Appendix A with the other Elliott projects, so we could go look to see how the Elliott State Forest is being treated under the grazing allotment. Thank you for the map you included that had for this project. It was good to be able to the georeference map around on the Elliott. But so I guess that's as good as we're going to get. We aren't going to get any more paper maps for the Elliott. I know some members of the public don't do those electronic maps as well. And the only paper map that you can get for the Elliott is if you go into a BLM office and you buy a Coos Bay BLM recreation map. And so maybe you might want to consider actually reissuing a paper map of the Elliott so people can drive around. And on that paper map, it'd be great to know where the land allocations start and stop on the road systems, like like the CRW and the Management Researchers Watershed. When you're driving around on the roads, there's no map that shows these land allocations and the road, so you really don't know exactly what land allocation you're in when you're driving on the road. So it would be great if you can combine those two maps at some point. Okay, the per acre limit for logging on the Elliott is 1,000 acres a year, according to the Forest Management Plan. And this is a 2-year plan, and it goes over the 2,000 acres by 345 acres. So you're exceeding the limit of the logging acres by 345, but this is a 4-year rolling average. So I assume in the next biannual operation plan, you're going to have quite a bit less logging that you're going to do because you're going over on this year. I was at a presentation last night in Roseburg by Dr. James Johnston, who described all the forest researches he was doing on the Umpqua National Forest, the Deschutes National Forest, and the Elliott State Forest. And he showed the maps of all his research projects on the Elliott State Forest in his pictures. But, when we look at the research in the operations plan, you describe 2 research projects and his is not in there. And so I was just curious. I didn't get a chance to ask him afterwards what exactly he was researching, but of course I'm curious and why it wasn't included with the other research projects in the operation plan. Can I go on for another 30 seconds? Am I over time? I just
You
want
are over time. I've been giving you 5 minutes, so why don't you take another 30 seconds and then we can come back to you after we revisit Fergus.
Okay, there is a right-of-way that has been granted or will soon be granted to an adjoining landowner that clear cuts through a riparian reserve, the conservation research watershed, and through marble murrelet mature habitat. This is in Township 22, Range 11, Section 11. I know exactly where this is, and I've been talking with Ryan about this project, and I discovered in the forest management plan that says you will not do any new right-of-ways that doesn't comply with the HCP. This doesn't comply with the HCP, so I'm assuming that you're denying this right-of-way as of now. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Fergus, I just wanted to open it back up to you if you wanted to follow up with Brett on your questions about the carbon project.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, I guess I can understand why you guys would want to slow walk your start in carbon. But as I've said from the beginning of this process, the carbon strategy should be the fundamental management principle of the forest, as the research proposal in the appendix for carbon exploration in the forest pointed out. The potential carbon density of this land is 500 tons per acre. It is phenomenal, the most in the world. So that should certainly be front and center, and not some little incidental exploration plan tacked on to which is basically just a harvest plan. That's really all you're proposing here. You've mentioned 3 OSU scientists particularly the ones who were behind the triad debacle, who are have presented ideas for research. One of them is just a back of the envelope thing, but really there's no research going on here. And in a research forest, everything you do should be oriented to a testable hypothesis. That's what science is about. You don't go out there and obliterate your experimental grounds without inquiry and discovering some sort of information about what you're doing to educate yourself. And I'm not talking about better ways to log, although that's a legitimate area, but it's hardly appropriate to a research forest. So I guess what I'm saying is your operations plan lacks strategic coherence. It ignores the necessity to present testable hypotheses for whatever you do. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can test it. You present a hypothesis, you have a control, and you see what happens. And that brings me to the real problem here, which is after the train wreck of Senate Bill 1546, OSU was absolutely the center of this whole endeavor from the beginning. And DSL spent, what, $10 million buying their services. And then they walked away. And they created this enormous vacuum, and that vacuum has not been filled. It's a strategic vacuum, it's an operational vacuum, it's a financial vacuum. I hate to say it, but I think you guys really need to go back and start over. I'll leave it at that.
Any staff that want to respond to that?
I think it's helpful to hear. I mean, it's Fergus, your take and opinion on it is part of what we want to be hearing and drawing feedback on from the public. And yeah, the operations plan is a specific thing that's focused on what would be done or happening on the ground the next 2 years, but obviously it's tied to everything that comes before it and is the bigger picture stuff that it references consistency with around the FMP and the HCP. I guess part of what we need to do is hear what people have to say right now and then digest it. It feels like, Darren, Chris, Ryan, and Amy, and respond to it. I mean, it does feel like sometimes though there were some very intentional moves around, where we've gone with the HCP and the FMP, and the operations plan is not the space to revisit or reopen that stuff. But we are committed in October of this upcoming year to revisit with the land board where we are with the research partnership and the approach on research. And that's what we're planning to do. And some of those bigger considerations seem like it's relevant in that research consortium and research planning space. And in the meantime, I think what we're trying to say is there's an expectation amongst some, including it feels like we've gotten pretty clear direction from the land board, but an expectation to get going around management of this forest again. And there are some things that we won't know until we do them. They're not, there are specific research projects proposed as part of this operations plan. And I think to Francis's question, we didn't reference James Johnston's because it's ongoing and it wasn't something new or proposed. And I think he had collected his data in the past and now he's presenting his findings. But if we've missed something, then we want to hear it and incorporate it. But we don't, there are some direct or discrete research proposals that have been floated in Appendix D. And then there's also stuff that's not traditional academic research, but we're not going to know, for example, like if it's a hypothesis around what are our logging costs going to be, or what's the volume of wood and growth in the trees that we know are out there, whether it's in extensive or intensive allocations. We're not going to really know if our assumptions or hypotheses were right until we do some management. And so it does feel like we're trying to learn on multiple levels in a modest way out of the gate here while we're listening to and digesting and figuring out where we're going on some of this big stuff without I don't know. I don't know, Fergus, if it's accurate to say we're gonna wreck the whole forest by what we're doing before we figured out our big picture through lines, you know? That just felt a little heavy.
Yeah, I don't mean to tar you. You walked into a really tough situation. You guys done a great job. I think this plan is very professionally done and very appropriate to the situation you find yourself in. You've done minimized potential harm. Uh, it makes perfect sense. So I have to credit you guys for that. Thank you.
And I don't know if
Fergus.
others have anything to add, but I think what you're raising is something I know, Darren, is on your mind. Like, yeah, this is a research forest. Let's make sure the dots are adding up. So I think you're not in left field, Fergus.
I'll just come on and say that myself. Yeah, Fergus, I appreciate your comments, and and Brett just kind of reiterated that that is one thing that's certainly on my mind is coming into this. So, and I appreciate all your comments. I've heard them, and I'm not afraid of hearing more of these comments in the future and having conversations around with both you and Francis and others. So, just wanted to put that out there in the room too. Thank you.
Yeah, one principle to remember is when you find yourself in a hole, you need to stop digging. Good luck with it.
Thank you, Fergus.
Thank you, Fergus. Francis, did you want to speak further on some questions you had earlier or new issues?
I just did, maybe during the question period, I should have gotten in what surveys did you do for the merlets that would be adjacent to a hard edge created from a region of a young stand? And then there's some work, isn't there, you're going to do on the outer edges of the Marble Merlet circles, and which unit was those in? So those are the two questions I had. But if you have time,
So,
And-
France, we haven't done any Mammoo surveys recently at all. All of the data that we're relying on is been, I don't know, past ODF surveys or whoever did the surveys back in the, I don't know, probably 13, 14, 15, 16. So yeah, we don't have any current surveys.
even though you might do some new impacts to some habitat, you don't know if there's a merlet there or not.
Yeah, we have to assume occupancy for all of those that are designated occupied. So no, we don't have any protocol to do surveys with this HCP unless we are going to harvest in potential occupied stands, then we
But
would
it's
have
potential
a-
occupied stands that you're going to clear cut next to and leave a hard edge on.
Yeah,
So-
if that's the case, then we would, if there's a hard edge, we do have some rules in the HCP to feather those edges. And so we will find those stands will be earmarked through our monitoring assessment here, and we'll see and adjust the prescription accordingly if we need to.
Yeah, and Ryan, that was the thing I was going to hit on too, is like Francis, this was part of the overall point of doing a programmatic approach to ESA compliance through the HCP was so that we weren't doing take avoidance surveys on every stand across the whole forest over time. And we negotiated that buffer strategy with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service around the issue of edge effects and what would happen if we were operating outside of occupied but still adjacent to it, and how to avoid or minimize rather the edge effects. And there's the whole strategy in the HCP, like formal conservation strategy related to that, as well as the one on the Habitat Suitability Index compliance. And so partly we'd be, I guess, undoing or undermining the work that we did to negotiate a programmatic if we just started going out and surveying everywhere. But like Ryan pointed out, if we're going to enter the mature stands and the potential habitat stands, then there is a stepwise approach on surveys.
And
Yeah, and those,
does that
Go ahead.
include adjacent to the mature stands? Is there any activities that you do if you put in a new hard edge on a mature stand? You're going to feather that, did I hear you say? And I forget what the project number was. It's one of the southern ones when you come into the Elliott south of the Loon Lake. It's one of those stands I noticed you're going to do region next to potential murrelet habitat.
yeah, I have to look at that again, make sure. Yeah, we are tracking all that. So we won't go outside of anything that we have committed to in the HCP. France, I did want to ask you if you received, I sent you an ODF map in the mail. Did you receive that?
I got it yesterday. Thank you very much. It's
Okay.
so helpful to have a real
Okay.
paper map. Yeah.
All right, so good. You got your paper map. Regarding the caps, you had mentioned that earlier that we were above the caps. We actually aren't above the caps because we have 1,000 acres, but there is 300 acres of additional room regarding restoration thins. And so
Right.
we are, even for a 2-year period, or if you do the math for annually, we are well within those caps, so we're okay there. Brett touched on the fire research. Yeah, the reason we didn't include that is because Johnston and Andrew Merschel, they had already conducted at least the plots. So they got collected all their data, and then I think they're now working on publishing that work. So that's why that wasn't included, because they weren't collecting any additional information, at least any data that we know of. And then the last one I'll hit on is your right-of-way. So that is an easement that was granted prior to this. That easement is already in place, and so it is grandfathered in. And so again, for the logging that could occur from that, it will not be on our property. It'll simply be moving forest products through on that easement on our road system. So I know you and I had had some conversations in the past about that. That easement was granted, and so it is in place. It does have a time limit, so if the operations are not done, I don't know off the top of my head when it expires, but then it will become obsolete after that. But that is an easement that will be grandfathered in and allowed to happen.
Hey, thank you for your response.
Sure.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, but I want to open it up to anyone else on the call. Before we end today, is there any other issues you'd like to talk about? Okay, with that, if you have any additional questions that you don't want to share on the recording, or if you'd just like to chat.
Emma?
Oh, Chris, go
Emma,
ahead.
it looks like Francis' hand is still up. I don't know if there's any additional questions. Maybe it went down.
She's got it.
I think I just put it down. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Francis. Yeah, again, I'm Emma Sloan. Happy to connect you with any of the other new Elliott staff or our existing staff. My email's up here, and thank you all for joining today. We'll go ahead and
Thanks,
end the meeting
everyone.
here.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emma.